Hello, my spookies. It's your host and narrator, Henrique Couto, here to bring you a little compilation that makes me think. Beware the Ides of March. I'm sure you've heard that saying, but maybe you're wondering what it means or what it could mean in the world of spooky. Well, tonight, I'm bringing you a very special compilation of comeuppance and revenge and so much more that gets pretty damn devious. So, get yourself comfy, get yourself cozy, and if you're listening to this on the day of release on Friday, February 28th, tomorrow, Saturday, March 1st, we're going live on YouTube, and you can check it out by going to weeklyspooky.com/live. From there, you can set a reminder to find out when we go live to talk about spooky things and play some games. But now, it's time for the show. Dead Ahead by Joe Salmo. Becca, don't come out here with your witchy bullshit, Tom yelled as he threw another shovelful of dirt behind him. If you want to help, get in here and help me dig. It's not witchy bullshit. I'm telling you, this is bad. A person died. We did it. This is going to come back on us threefold. This is a lot of negative energy, Becca said, pushing her long brown hair behind her ear. Her boyfriend Tom was in a hole about 3 feet deep and getting deeper by the second. Come take your turn. I need a break. It's a lot harder than they make it look in the movies, Tom said. I told you I want no part in this, Becca replied, taking a step back into the chilly night. You already are a part of this. You're just as guilty as I am. This poor bastard died because of both of us, Tom retorted, clanging the shovel off the corpse laying on the damp ground. I wasn't the one driving, Becca said, wiping a tear from her eye. And I suppose your next excuse is going to be you had your mouth full and couldn't see over the wheel, right? Tom sneered. Look, neither of us wanted this, but we have to take care of it. Do you know what would happen if we went to the cops? Yeah, I know. We're wanted. Look, I don't want to go to jail for murder either, Becca argued. Murder? Who said anything about murder? It was an accident. We might get manslaughter, but surely not murder, Tom responded, pulling himself out of the hole and wiping his brow, his blonde hair dirty with the earth he had been tossing. This'll have to be deep enough. What if somebody finds the body? Becca asked. No one would give a fuck. This is Jersey. I think you've watched too many mob movies, Becca said, and turned away from the grave. She looked at the car, sitting just off the road enough into the pines to be hidden from the traffic. Her blue eyes focused on the dent in the passenger side bumper, and the blood that stood out starkly on the white paint. They were never going to get away with it, she thought. There was just too much evidence. They should have just called the cops when they hit that jogger. One thing was for sure. It was the last time Tom was going to talk her into roadhead. Becca, are you even paying attention? Tom asked. She turned around and saw him standing there with the jogger's arms in his hands. Come on, help me swing him into the hole, he finished impatiently. I told you, I don't want that negative energy, she said, crossing her arms in defiance. I told you that witchy bullshit has to go. We have been dating for almost a year now, and I haven't seen you do shit with it. So unless you're going to wiggle your nose and lift the corpse into the grave, get your ass over here and lift this bastard with me, Tom said, tossing the jogger's arms down onto the damp earth. Becca rolled her eyes. With a sigh, she gave in and walked around to the jogger's feet. She grabbed his ankles and looked at Tom, waiting. Well, are we doing this? She asked. Tom grabbed the other end and together they put the jogger into the open grave. She looked at the mangled person lying there, wondering what kind of life he had before they had taken it from him. Did he have a family? Was someone looking for him? Her thoughts were interrupted when the jogger's face got a shovel full of dirt. She looked up at Tom and saw him in a new light. This was too easy for him. She wondered if this was the first time he had to bury a body. She really didn't know much of his past. He never spoke about his life before they met last year. She knew he wasn't Mr. Right, more of a Mr. Right Now, one that got her out of a bad situation. If she was being honest, he was a bit of an asshole. "Don't worry, I got this," he said as he continued to throw dirt into the grave. "We only have one shovel. You want me to use my hands?" She snipped at him. "Why don't you go wait in the car then?" Tom responded. "I was going to say a few words when we were done. Nothing much, but something should be said." Tom scoffed. "I'll say something. Don't worry about it." "Sometimes you can be a real jerk, you know that?" she said and stormed off sullenly to the car. She plopped in the passenger seat, slamming the door. "You like him so much, maybe you should give him head too. I think it's going to get real stiff soon," Tom yelled, smacking the corpse again with the shovel. Becca could hear it ring out even from the car. She reached under the seat and found her bag. She dug inside for a cigarette, just to take the edge off. She pulled out a worn paperback. Payback Rituals and Spells of Revenge. She remembered that her friend Amanda let her borrow it. They had found it in her mother's items after her suicide. That was just before she left town with Tom. She thumbed through it while waiting. The Revenant. The dead with a mission. Bring a recently deceased person back to right the wrong of death. This is a gray area of balance with nature. On the one hand, it disrupts death, but it can help the soul reach peace through resolution. The weight of this ritual can be heavy on one's soul. Caution should be used while contemplating this ritual. Haste will be your enemy. Ha! Would serve the asshole right if I brought that jogger back. Teach him a lesson. I'm the only one stupid enough to miss him, and it would absolve my guilt. Becca said to the empty car. Haven't done shit with it. Hey, babe, I'm all done, just going to say a few words, Tom yelled as he unzipped his zipper. A steaming stream landed on the newly packed earth. Ooh, aw. Those enough words for you? He called over his shoulder. That son of a bitch, Becca said and got out of the car, but instead of heading towards him, she went off into the woods alone, with her bag. Where are you going? It was just a joke, he called out as he shook out the last drops. Come on, babe. Tom chased after her into the woods. Babe? He heard a few twigs snap off to his left. He turned in that direction, but it was too dark to make anything out. She was heading farther into the barrens away from the highway. Okay, you made your point. Come back and do a real eulogy. I won't interrupt, I promise, Tom called out into the night. Was that a flashlight ahead? He sighed and headed towards the light he saw. Becca was on her knees in a small clearing, illuminated not only by the moonlight above, but by her flashlight laying on the dew-covered grass in front of her. She was saying something, over and over again, in a whisper that Tom couldn't make out. Babe? He said, shining his light on her back, casting her shadow on the trees around them. It's done. We can leave now. Becca opened her eyes and turned her head. Quickly she placed some objects into her bag before he could see what they were. Be right with you, she said, and stood up, wiping off her stockings. She reached down for her bag, but his hands on hers froze her in place. What were you doing out here with your bag? He asked, intensely meeting her gaze. I had to use the bathroom and I didn't want to do it close to the highway, Becca replied, and pulled her hand away from his. She clutched her bag to her chest with one hand and gestured with the other. Lead the way, she finished sarcastically. You know, sometimes you can be a real bitch. You better get that in check before I leave your ass for a younger model, he said as he led the way back towards the car. I doubt you could find someone that would put up with your shit for very long. Tom turned and faced her. I'm serious. Your looks will only get you so far. You better drop that attitude before I drop you, he threatened. Are you kidding me? You're threatening me? It's not a threat. It's a promise, he said, and stared at her for a few seconds. When she didn't respond, he turned back into the woods and continued on. That is the most cliché saying, Becca mumbled under her breath, but followed Tom into the night. She heard the words Tom spoke again, but this time, it wasn't his voice. It was her father's. The threats and beatings that she had been suppressing came rushing back. She remembered the last time he spoke those words to her. It was just a little over 1 year ago. She had come home from Amanda's house, where they were studying for the history final. She came in through the back door into the kitchen. It was 7 p.m., and she had not eaten since lunch. She bumped into the dish rack, sending a steak knife onto the floor. She closed her eyes and froze, hoping her father hadn't heard. Becca remembered opening her eyes and then rummaging through the cabinet for something to eat. Her eyes lit up when she found a box of cereal. In her haste to eat, she dropped the box, scattering the flakes across the linoleum floor. Her father entered the room a second later and saw the mess on the floor. What is this? Clean this up, he yelled as he made his way to the fridge for another beer. At this time of night, he was probably on his fifth. She tried to walk past him to get to the broom closet, but her father's large hands stopped her. He threw her down to the floor. I said, clean this up, you clumsy bitch. I was getting the broom, she said, looking up at him through tear-blurred eyes. I didn't say get the broom. I said clean this shit up, her father yelled and kicked her arm that she was leaning on. Her face dropped down onto the floor among the cereal. She blinked the tears away and saw in front of her the knife she had dropped earlier. Becca sat up on the floor, placing the steak knife under her so that he didn't see it. She looked up at her father as he cracked open his fresh can of beer. He turned towards her. You're so hungry. Eat it off the floor, he said, and pushed her back down. Eat it, you pig, or I swear to God I'll end you. Are you threatening me? That's not a threat, slut. That's a promise, her father said. Becca gripped the knife hard and stabbed her father in the thigh. He cried out and dropped his beer. With his other leg, he kicked her. She had the knife gripped so tight, she pulled it out of him as she fell back. What did you do, bitch? I'll kill you, she remembered him saying before she had lost control. The next thing she remembered was her father laying in a strange pool of blood, cereal and beer on the floor. He was so still. Becca came out of it as they neared the car. Tom threw the shovel and flashlight into the trunk and walked around to the driver's side as Becca stood there trying to make the image leave her mind. What's wrong with you? Tom asked. Becca looked towards the shallow grave with a look of disappointment before turning back to Tom. Was she going to actually get back into his car after what he said? She looked at Tom and saw her father's face. She tried to shake that image, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't self-defense. Just Tom being an asshole. She had her doubts that he would actually hit her. A twig snapped in the woods, and both of them turned towards the sound. In the darkness, something stirred. Who's out there? Tom called. The only response was the sound of a heavy footfall. Becca's hair started to stand on the back of her neck, and she got an uneasy feeling. She tried to get in the car, but it was locked. Tom? She said unevenly. Tom didn't answer, his eyes transfixed on the image before him. In the flashing lights from the passing cars on the highway, Becca caught a glimpse of the man approaching. Another loud footfall from the man as he dragged behind him the broken leg inside the blood-stained pair of sweatpants. Becca looked on in horror at the twisted neck and the head lolling to one side. Did it actually work? "Tom, open the door. Let's get out of here," Becca said, second-guessing what she had done. It looked so wrong as it moved towards them. "One sec, babe," Tom said, and pulled out the pistol he kept tucked in the back of his jeans. "I think this asshole wants to play." "Tom, unlock the fucking door," she begged as fear tears started to flow. Her heart was pounding in her ears. Tom took a step closer to the reanimated jogger. "That's far enough, asshole. It was an accident. I'm sure you can appreciate that. Let's go get a beer and talk this over," Tom said, aiming the pistol at the jogger's head. He won't listen," Becca yelled in fear. She ran to the trunk of the car. Luckily, Tom had not shut it, and she grabbed the shovel. Beside the shovel in the truck was a hunting knife. She tucked the blade into her belt and hefted the shovel as she came around the car. Tom came into view just in time for her to see the jogger lunge at him. He fired a shot. They fell to the ground, the jogger on top. His head flopped around as they struggled, but its hands were wrapped around Tom's neck. She cried out and ran over to help. She swung the shovel and hit the jogger in the back, to little effect. A few more swings made no difference. In her frustration, she threw down the shovel and kicked the jogger, who fell off the side of Tom, but didn't let go of his neck. Becca could hear Tom trying to gasp for air. She grabbed the jogger's arms and tried to pull them off of Tom, but the grip was too strong. Tom was going to die. She did this. She called the revenant back from the grave. She should have known better. The witchy bullshit was going to kill Tom. He could no longer say she didn't do shit with it. Just then, Becca had an epiphany. Tom was going to die. The thing was busy with Tom. She scrambled into Tom's pants pockets and found the car keys. She jumped to her feet and ran to the car. She fired up the engine and threw it into reverse. With a final look at Tom, who was now still, she punched the gas and backed towards the highway. Tom never let her drive, but she'd seen it enough to figure it out. The car bounced over uneven ground as she sped in reverse towards the lights behind her. Once she was on the side of the road, she spun the car around and threw it into drive. She pulled out onto the highway, cutting off a truck who blared its horn at her. She opened an energy drink Tom had bought earlier but left on the seat unopened and took a swig. There was going to be a new Becca now. One who took no one's shit. Later that evening, Becca sat at the small motel table in her room. She was going through the loot they had accumulated over the past year. She found a bag of cash that she didn't know about and had just finished counting it. $12,000 was a lot of money, more than she'd ever seen. Why did Tom always tell her they were broke? There was a bang on the door. It must be the pizza I ordered, she thought, and rose from the chair. Another bang on the door before she could reach it. "I'm coming," she called out, grabbing a 20 from the table. She was going to tip big. Why not share her good fortune? She opened the door and dropped the cash. Standing on the other side was her father and the jogger. "No," her mouth formed to say, but no noise came out. She took a step back into the room in horror of what she was looking at. With arm extended, they entered, grasping for her. "No! Why are you here? Tom was driving," she said to the jogger, then looked into her father's dead eyes. "You deserved what you got, you son of a bitch. There is no revenge for you," she said in defiance. Becca was a new woman and wasn't going to take shit from her father, alive or dead. She reached behind her and pulled the hunting knife out of her belt. The revenants charged her, knocking her back onto the double bed with their mass. She could smell the grave on her father as he climbed on top of her. There wasn't enough room for her to swing the knife. In desperation, she moved the blade between them. She turned the tip downwards, towards her own chest, and plunged it in. She didn't want her father to get his revenge. He should suffer. She smiled as the pain flooded her. She felt herself getting weak, and with a last act of defiance, spit blood into her father's face before succumbing to her wound. Hell Hath No Fury by Aaron Cook. Oh shoot! The cookies! Zelda Mae Darling had been in the kitchen all day, and the stress of hosting a dinner party had caused her to nearly forget about the chocolate chip treats that were roasting in the oven. She fitted her dainty hands into mitts and plucked her signature dessert from the sauna. No blemishes of overcooking to be found. Pulling the elongated trays out, she didn't wait 2 minutes before conducting a taste test. Delicious, if she did say so herself. She treated herself to a second one. Jake wouldn't approve of the extra snack, but what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. There was more than enough food, she justified, with internal guilt. The housewife had been in domestic bliss for 3 full years and was still in her early 20s. Born in small-town Arkansas in 1950, the Belle had left home to attend Texas A&M. Towards the end of her first year there, she worked an alumni ball where she met Big Jake Darling, an oil bigwig and generous donor to his old stomping grounds. Despite the 3-decade age gap, Jake fell madly in love with the fair-skinned, dark-haired server in the go-go boots, and his resources made it pretty easy for Zelda Mae to ignore the pot belly, receding hairline, and uneven mustache. After mere weeks of whirlwind courting, the pair joined in matrimony in front of a crowd of hundreds at his 90-acre ranch in the otherwise modest village of Tumbleweed. Jake was eager to prove to his nubile bride that he had learned from the mistakes of his first 2 marriages. There had been some downs. Jake was ornery, hypercritical, and mentioned his appreciation for the anatomy of other women, most even younger than her, quite often. But he was a man, and oh, what a man he could be. That little wallflower who entered College Station would be surprised at what she became. Prior to her nuptials, Zelda Mae's culinary expertise topped out at popping microwave popcorn, but now she was a regular Julia Child. She chuckled at what her younger self would say if she found out about the elaborate shindigs she now held on a regular basis. Tonight, she would be hosting a soiree for Jake's colleagues and their wives. It was an important one. Cattle mogul K.L. Bandy had accepted an invitation. Joining his inner circle was a guaranteed ticket to political success, which the oil man craved. He had been locally beloved on the village council for a number of years, but he was sick of judging pie bake-offs and attending ribbon-cutting ceremonies for libraries. The state senate was calling him. All Bandy had to do was hand him the phone. 10 minutes had passed since Jake's promised 5:30 homecoming. This worried Zelda Mae sick. It was a pretty common occurrence for him to overshoot his ETA, but precedent never made it peaceful. He was a wealthy and powerful man, which automatically put a target on his back. The poor wife never knew if her gregarious partner had blown away the time chatting with an old chum, or had been assassinated by an envious political opponent. The hypothetical loss of her paramour made her sick to her stomach, but she couldn't regress the paranoia. Finally, Jake stumbled in, having gotten a head start on the spirit imbibement of the night. "Hi, honey," Zelda Mae lit up. "Hey, Biscuit." Jake hiccuped his pet name for her as his massive jowls jiggled and his pale white belly cut into his everything's bigger in Texas belt buckle. He stunk of the cheapest gin Brady's bar had to offer, and the collar of his white Colonel Sanders suit was scuffed. In Zelda Mae's eyes, she was looking at Paul Newman. "The guests should be here soon." "Getting there. You need any help?" "Well, actually, if you could..." Jake's sobering snooze began the second it was even implied there was a way he could streamline the toil of his labored spouse. It was no big deal. She was pretty sure she liked doing housework. There were still several dishes she needed to magically conjure before 9 o'clock. Then she needed to wash up. The feast worked up a sweat, and it would be unladylike to not present herself as immaculate as possible. Not that long ago, the looming threat of the deadline would have scared her something fierce, but not anymore. Sure enough, the spread was laid out, and she emerged from the powder room renewed in her pearls and heels mere minutes before the first ring of the doorbell, the sound of which revived her downed beau, who quickly wiped the drool from his face. "Harvey! Lois!" The learners were the beneficiaries of the death of the mister's father, which granted them control over one of the state's largest construction firms. Harvey had never actually seen a pile of rubble, and Lois, also from old money, was prone to making statements that made her formerly modest friend feel insecure about her background. Up next were the Duprees. Don had recently acquired controlling interest in the popular, inexpensive, and small chain Selman's department store, which he was eagerly licking his lips to merge with a larger company. Flonetta and Ducky Perry arrived shortly after. Years of entertaining them hadn't shed a light on what they did for a living. All Zelda May knew was they were filthy rich. Just when Zelda May was about to shepherd her company into the dining room for their banquet, a limousine pulled up to the Darling residence. The driver exited his position to release an invitee that Zelda May had forgotten about. But Jake certainly hadn't. K.L. Bandy. Everybody stopped what they were doing to gaze upon the richest man in the Lone Star State, which angered Lois Lerner, who had only belted out a stanza and a half as she cooed and curled over the piano. The VIP looked nothing like the image Zelda May had cooked up in her head. She had pictured a good old boy with roughly the same features as her beloved and his colleagues. Instead, a decrepit skeleton shambled up to her porch, escorted on each shoulder by a Miss Texas contender. The man, half as old as the earth, and his gal pals glacially meandered towards his admirers inside. An irate Jake furiously barked at Zelda May to stop daydreaming and open the door for the guest of honor long before he reached the welcome mat. "Howdy, Mr. Brandy!" An excited Don Dupree powered through the crowd to win the race to determine the old man's inaugural conversation. Dupree firmly grasped Bandy's hand in a shake, which cracked the Methuselah of meat's worn joints. Embarrassed, Double D frantically apologized to the unoffended Baron. Despite his assurance, Don replayed the moment in his head, over and over, removing himself from the camaraderie to self-flagellate. "Hello, Mr. Bandy," beamed Zelda May. "Jake has told me so much about—" "Can we get you anything, Mr. Bandy?" The king of the castle stifled his wife. He shot her a dirty look as the ancient one declined. Jake pulled Zelda May aside and mentioned his distaste for the comment when Bandy was out of earshot. What things was she implying he had mentioned? Did he look suspicious just now? She was going to blow his big shot. "Sorry, honey. Just don't talk to him or look at him." The convoy entered the pure white dining room. Effusive scores were given to Zelda May's creations before a bite was even taken, including many from the treasured newcomer, who sat in the head chair after the usual alpha ceded his territory, for this one night only. Convivial talk among the boys followed as the women chatted about past and future dinner parties, although a rattled Don mostly just nodded in agreement, too worried about throwing another boneheaded interception. This was their one chance to impress a man that could fatten their portfolios. Ducky Perry fantasized about his soon-to-be new best friend handing over the deed to one of his tremendous golf courses. Jake took every inch to bring up his steakhouse concept. Tired of all beef all the time, the gazillionaire never offered much response to the proposal. Did this guy even know anything about running a restaurant? Further incessant half-baked hypotheticals continued to line dance on the geezer's already feeble nerves. The brisket was excellent, the corn was phenomenal, and the apple pie had been some of the best he had tasted in his countless years on this planet. But another round of rump kissers had left Bandy exasperated. "Zelda May, quit staring at Mr. Bandy," Jake reprimanded his adult wife as if she was a toddler with a tattling habit. "I wasn't," she defended herself. Another round of Tupperware talk had been her limit. For the past 10 minutes, she had been zoned out, affixed on nothing in particular. "Yes, you was. Now apologize." "It's quite all right," Bandy foolishly said in an agitation that seemed to imply he was more irritated by him than her. "Sometimes she gets like this." "Like what?" Zelda May countered, now more anxious to hear her fictional shortcomings than appearing demure. "Don't start. You started it." "Folks, I think I'm gonna call it a night," the esteemed mogul said as he gestured for his twins to help him up and out. Part of him felt bad for his dog-piled host, but most of him wanted to thank her for giving him an excuse to escape this never-ending assault of false praise. "See what you did?" Jake blared to a degree that the hard of hearing Bandy heard from a room away. "Zelda May, honey." Flonetta's fake accent permeated with a passive aggressiveness that elicited a cold draft down the pariah's spine. "I hope you're happy." "I almost had a third car dealership," Don whined. The grumbling gaggle emotionally and wordlessly returned to their vehicles, leaving Zelda May alone to face Jake's wrath. In addition to tonight's alleged staring gaffe, he found nitpicks in the food he scarfed down and found flaws with her hair, makeup, and chubby cheeks. If she kept letting herself go, that girl he saw today after work might just have to move in. Jake continued his relentless attack, which would have driven Zelda May to tears if she hadn't cried them all out over the years. As a compulsion, she started to work on the Everest of dishes. Of course, the supposed clean freak didn't offer her a modicum of help. At least he was talking to her. That was a refreshing change of pace. She began scrubbing the tainted plates in a fury as Jake continued his verbal bull rush. A suddy mess, Zelda May pulled the dishwasher rack out and marched to the fridge for some Chardonnay, which she elected to down straight from the bottle. Jake scoffed at the lush she could be and attempted to pry the bottle loose. Much bigger, his strip sack was overpowering, spiking and staining the kitchen floor with wet glass. Naturally, this was seen as purely Zelda May's error, which resulted in a final flurry of condescension. Sick of hearing these judgments, the harried housewife gave her husband a shove, her anger propelling her strength to unprecedented levels. The back of Jake's boots skidded over the edge of spillage. The hoss tried to compose his balance, which only caused him to dance more erratically before he fell over backwards, in a heap, cracking his neck on the still exposed dishwasher. The crunch was louder than the snap of the wishbone of her famous Thanksgiving turkey. No choking, no throes, no mournful departing apology. Instant death. Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back. Stunned, the accidental killer stared back at her unintentional victim. The eyes that had been full of fire just seconds before were now ghostly white. She didn't blame herself. It was a self-induced accident, a fatal folly caused by his own foolishness. Now single, part of her felt sad about the loss of her partner. But more of her felt relieved that there was finally some quiet in here. Now she could tidy this mess in peace. Calm as could be, Zelda May grabbed the mop and dustpan and commenced the arduous cleanup, a chore that was made more difficult by the 250-pound hindrance that blocked some of the puddle. Manslaughter was no excuse for a dirty home. "My husband is dead," she phoned the cops. As hard as she tried to appear hysterical, She was no actress. The death of Big Jake Darling sent shockwaves through the local community. Although Zelda May figured she would be spending the foreseeable future playing the part of the sympathetic widow, her adopted home quickly made her a female Peter Sellers and cast her in many roles. A bloodthirsty harpy, a cold-blooded Jezebel, and an unscrupulous gold digger who pulled out the ultimate gambit to collect Jake's money, which, unbeknownst to them, was sealed off by the prenup he convinced her to sign. Many claimed they saw this coming years ago. There was always something off about that darling woman. Even with forensic experts confirming the death by misadventure theory, the late's buddy, one Sheriff Zeke Hitchens, decided to treat this as what they all knew it was: a heartless murder. That year's trial of the century followed. Soon everyone with access to a newspaper had an opinion on Zelda May Darling. Jake's financial accomplishments, subjective platitudes, and status as a local leader were broadcasted non-stop with no mention of his tantrums or philandering proclivities. On the other side of the token, any assumed character defect of Zelda May was taken with a tower of salt. Don Dupree mentioned the foaming madness he witnessed firsthand at the dinner party, and wondered aloud how he narrowly escaped the massacre. The defendant was powerless and unable to bring up the drunken, not-so-nice words Harvey Lerner had to say about Jake that a similarly inebriated Lois had blurted to her during an Avon social. Zelda May was without any support. Even her own mother had severed ties, fearful of what having a cozy relationship with her criminally insane daughter would have on her own reputation. I didn't raise her that way, you know, Mama Darling made sure to alert everyone in the courthouse. The judgment was swift. Zelda May Darling was going to fry. The poor girl had made the mistake of bagging a lofty and influential trophy. $20 million of leverage had been the difference between life without parole and the electric chair. The consensus was euphoric. Some felt even the most damning conviction was still too lenient for that bitch. Too bad they couldn't personally summon Satan to drag her to the netherworld where she belonged. State-endorsed killing is a lengthy process. Although scheduled for a 1972 execution, Zelda May's lawyers appealed and petitioned as much as they could, much to the chagrin of the mob. Years passed. No longer was she a bubbly socialite or an angelic homecoming queen. She had grown hardened by the prison system. Unkempt hair, a haggard face, a perpetual scowl were all that remained. A new charity believed they had found a loophole to prevent her death from being a crispy one, which earned them hatred and mockery. It was too late anyway. She wanted to die. Finally, on the hottest day of 1983, Zelda May was ushered to the chamber. Her last meal the previous night was 2 cookies, one more than Jake permitted her to have. The condemned was placed in the Sparky Ferry and asked if she had any final words. She had none. A guard walked to the lever. He had been a mere child during Zelda May's trial. His mother and father made her out to be a boogie woman, but there was a sadness in her wild eyes. A story only she knew. Still, this is what the people of Texas craved. If there was a way to move her demise to a packed house at the Astrodome, few would protest it. The guard swung the switch. Zelda May's pupils bulged and her limbs thrashed. The watts coursing through her veins were nothing compared to the hatred flowing inside her vengeful brain. She outlasted the average survival time by 10 agonizing seconds out of pure spite. Even when public enemy number 1 had been reduced to a charred hunk of flesh, the overseers were fearful she had even more fight to give. "She's hell's problem now, boys." The warden congratulated the elimination of the menace. "Let's hope they keep her." Hope you bitches are having a good sleigh. Delaney Parker and her flamboyant co-host Chet screamed their popular trademarked greeting before they launched into the exposition of their latest vlog. A consummate influencer, Delaney insisted on 14 more takes before she was satisfied. Chet and Delaney were the team behind Booze and Bludgeonings, a lifestyle brand they had started together 4 years prior while attending UCLA. What started off as an online channel devoted to their mutual interest in both true crime and alcohol blossomed into a multi-level brand that included a podcast, t-shirts, and of course, their very own IPA. The duo was most famous for their broadcasts from murder sites. Their most popular episode up to this point had been the night they braved the Lizzie Borden Inn. Although it was a bit intimidating to be on the grounds of one of the most infamous slayings ever, neither talking head believed in the supernatural, contrary to what their subscribers believed. Chet had added those orbs and moans in post right after they filmed their 40 minutes worth and bolted. Their fans lapped that slop up. B&B was a polarizing empire. Many felt their content was crass and exploitive, not to mention derivative. However, those critics were drowned out by their adoring acolytes, who loved to live vicariously through the pair's Instagram page just as much as they enjoyed the journey into the macabre. Their latest stunt was sure to be their biggest hit yet, a live midnight broadcast from the grave of Zelda Mae Darling, a Southern belle who rang for the last time in 1982. In the 40 years since Zelda Mae's death, Tumbleweed had grown up to a fair-sized city of 60,000, several miles from the pauper's grave they had given their most notorious former resident. Despite the shame of her now dead or senile dammers, the terror of Tumbleweed had been given a forgiving retrospective thanks to countless televised reenactments, which elaborated on the kangaroo court injustice she had been forced to endure, as well as revelatory evidence Jake Darling may not have been a nice man. A museum in her honor now stood not far from the very same courthouse she had been mortally punished. Cheap paperbacks inspired by her saga littered bookstores. A street fair sold nachos and cotton candy on the weekend closest to the anniversary of the night she lost her innocence. Tourists, mostly women who occasionally had half the mind to butcher their own doofus husbands, flooded the streets of the town that had ostracized her. Zelda Mae was forced to watch it all. Somewhere. Every cheap trinket, every hollow word of support, every dollar made on her trauma. A montage of retribution against her. A cosmic decree for an unpremeditated act. No longer human, she still felt the pain of her penance burn across her changed image. She pleaded for her unseen tormentor to stop, which only intensified the noise. 4 decades of torture had felt like 4 eons. Where was this adulation back in her own day? These parasites worshipping her were no better than the cocksuckers who put her away. The cycle flipped back to rage as she gnashed and snarled, vowing to break free. Halfway across town, 2 of those profiteers had taken up shelter at the Lone Star Motel. Surveying her outfit for the big show, Delaney was assured by her boyfriend that she looked banging as he cradled her body, which earned a push. No macho bullshit. Chet needed to focus and stay in the caricature they had created. It was funnier, and the demographics suggested their male viewership might take a hit if they found out she was off the market. This was a big night, and he wasn't going to ruin it. Neither were the haters online. Tonight she was going to break the internet. Fuck! I keep losing service! It was now 11:58, and the event seemed on thin ice due to spotty reception. Chet was getting fed up with Delaney's diva-ness. The Hicks had buried Zelda Mae so far out in the boonies that Delaney feared they wouldn't make it on time. Finally, right over top the only recently installed marker, 2 bars lit up. It was gonna happen. Zelda Mae's reputation had allowed them to become innovators. Cemeteries usually frowned on trifling among the graves. Delaney learned that the hard way. She took a deep breath and visualized the viral hit she had on her hands. The countdown hit 0. The red light went on. The marshy ground began to open up. "What the fuck?" Chet said in his natural gruff accent, which broke their no unbleeped swearing rule. "Chet, girl, we're live," Delaney sternly reminded as she panned the camera just as her lover was forcefully snatched by a bony hand. First by the leg, and then quickly by the throat. "Fuck all of you," the Revenant hissed as she smashed another man's neck. On purpose this time. "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god!" Delaney took off, half in fear, half in amazement. All she had to do was outrun this old bag of bones, and she'd have the most watched video of all time. 40 years of rust and rot had not slowed Zelda May down. The former track star let her prey have a head start just to give her some false hope, and then sicked her, the bones of her malformed legs twisting and bending with each stride until she pounced on this intruder, pinning her against the side of the vehicle they had violated her resting place with. She was a pretty girl, roughly the same age she had been the night she really died. Zelda May looked at the ghastly visage in the rearview window, gasped, and with one violent tug, ripped Delaney's face clean off. She needed it more than her. The triple homicider realized she had crudely applied the mask and adjusted it over the exposed rottage, shooing away a few worms as well. She was young and beautiful again, with a whole town to paint red. Zelda May reset her lower body and made her way towards Tumbleweed. The audience couldn't believe the sheer tackiness of this spectacle. Booze and bludgeonings faking their own deaths. A phony monster. Never-ending footage of dirt. The channel had truly jumped the shark. Even their most loyal followers logged off the live stream in droves. By the time the battery had ran out, the incident was so panned, Chet and Delaney never made another video or public appearance. Ever again. The Stop Sign Man by Bryce Gibson. 1. For guys that grow up around this part of South Carolina, stealing stop signs is a rite of passage. All for the sake of an old urban legend. It is something some of us do on our 17th birthday. If you choose to do it, there are 3 rules to follow. 1. Do it alone. 2. Don't tell a soul about what you see. And 3. The most important rule of them all. Never get caught. If you do, the Stop Sign Man will make your life a living hell. I, Stratton Duke, failed at number 3. And the folklore is right. My life sucks. 2. Most everybody around here has heard the legend at some time or another. If you haven't, you're either too young or you've been living under a rock. It goes something like this. On the night of your 17th birthday, steal a county stop sign, take it out to the old Williamson barn, and you will see him for yourself. The first time I ever heard the story, I was 7 years old. I was sitting with Dad at the barber shop on Main Street. It was mid-afternoon and I had just gotten out of school for the day. Halloween was right around the corner. Mr. Perry, the barber, had the shop decorated with paper jack-o'-lanterns, green-faced witches, and spooky black cats. After telling Dad that he'd heard a stop sign had been stolen the night before, the two of them discussed the fact that it had been so-and-so's birthday. None of it made sense to me, at the time. Then Mr. Perry looked at me and asked, "Do you know about the stop sign man?" I told him I had no idea. "Well," the barber continued, "he has eyes shaped like octagons. They glow red and twirl around and around." After we got home and I was lying in bed with the blanket pulled up to my chin, I asked Dad if Mr. Perry was just saying those things to scare me. With it being Halloween, I figured it was possible. "It's just an urban legend," Dad said. "A ghost story. It's something that gets passed down and told again and again." After that day, the legend was ingrained deep in my mind. Even though I didn't know many details, I thought about it often, and it wasn't just me who fell under the spell. Soon I realized the other kids at school knew about it too. Sometimes at recess we'd play a game we called Stop the Stop Sign Man. One of us would be him, and the others would be his adversaries. We played the game on the wobbly roundabout from which we tried to fling the stop sign man off of. Octagons play a big part in the weird mythology, from the signs themselves to the strange locale. Over the years, I'd seen the Williamson barn many times in passing. I always knew something was a little off-kilter about the construction, but I couldn't pinpoint what. The building stands on a stretch of overgrown land next to a cow pasture and dense woods. Not long after learning about the stop sign man, I realized the truth. The barn has 8 sides of equal length. An octagon. Needless to say, with the knowledge of the story, I was terrified to go anywhere near that place. 3. Boy, how things change. Between the ages of 7 and 16, I became a completely different person. My body grew in ways I never imagined. Over those years, I shot up like a weed. Now I'm nearly 6 feet tall. I don't fit in with any particular group at school. That's not to say I don't have friends, I do, but for the most part I linger on the outside, looking in. 10 years ago, nobody would have been able to drag my skinny ass anywhere near the Williamson barn. And now I'm sitting here, offering myself up like it's the great sacrifice that will save all of humanity. And really, it's about a girl. Her name is Allison Weaving, new to our part of Crow County at the beginning of senior year. From the moment I saw her with her long blonde hair and perfect body, she was everything I wanted. To put it simply, I would have done almost anything to have a chance with her. Unfortunately, what Allison wanted was far removed from the likes of me. Right off the bat, she became besties with Becca Mansfield. Becca, a literal beauty queen, liked to hang out with a slightly rougher crowd than the atmosphere me and my friend Greg Collins could provide. The group was led by Mark Taylor. Every day after school, Mark and his gang liked to congregate behind the big courthouse on the town square. There they smoked stolen cigarettes, drew half-assed graffiti on trash cans, and dared each other to do stupid shit like flipping mid-air from a picnic table. One Friday night in early fall, I dragged Greg to a party at Mark's house because I knew Allison would be there. Mark's parents were out of town and the place was slammed. Greg and I pushed our way through the crowd. We found Allison and Becca sitting on the countertop in the kitchen. They were watching Mark and his friends do the latest viral challenge, placing a penny on the prongs of a halfway plugged-in phone charger. As sparks flew, I couldn't help but to notice how both Allison and Becca laughed at what they were witnessing. At that moment, one thing became glaringly clear to me. For Allison Weaving to notice me, I needed more of an edge. 4. I'm gonna do it, I say. Thursday night, it's on. My 17th birthday is only 3 days away. According to the legend, you only get one shot. If I don't do it, I might regret it later, I add. Greg and I are sitting in one of the study rooms at the library, which is located in a flat brick building on the square. He's on one side of the wide wooden table and me on the other. Greg throws a pencil and it hits me upside the head. "You could have put my eye out!" I yell out and retrieve the yellow number 2 from the floor, promptly flinging it back in his direction. Greg ducks out of the way. The pencil bounces off the cinder block wall behind him and rolls underneath the radiator heater. Greg sits up straight and stares at me. "The stop sign man is just a lame ghost story. You know that," he says. "You need to grow up, man." We pack up our belongings and walk outside. Greg reaches into the front pocket of his book bag and pulls out a pack of cigarettes he'd lifted from his older brother. Without asking, he hands one to me. "I just don't want you to get in trouble," he says. Chip Wagner is the most recent guy we know of to perform the ritual, and that was 10 years ago. Chip was caught and charged with theft. With the common knowledge of the legend, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who to bring in for questioning. After all, it was Chip's birthday. I place the cigarette between my lips, light the tip with Greg's lighter and inhale. The smoke makes me cough and Greg laughs at my lack of experience. Besides, if you're that desperate for some action, I'm sure Roxy is ready and willing. Just take your ass over to the filling station. By the time we were young teenagers, we'd already heard the rest of the stop sign man folklore. After entering the barn with a sign as an offering, a woman appears. People say she takes your innocence. She makes you a man, they say. No one really knows what that means, though. Obviously, with what Greg is suggesting to me now, his takeaway leans more towards something of a sexual nature. The girl he's talking about, Roxy, is someone who grew up in the boggy land on the other side of the railroad tracks. Swamp rats, we call them. I glance across the square. The filling station is visible from here, and I see her. She's sitting on an old wooden church pew that's pushed up against the side of the store. I groan in disgust. I'm sure she is, but I don't want to catch some kind of disease. Later that night, after having birthday dinner with my dad, I drive all the way out to Lehman Road, to where an intersection sits deep in a long stretch of pines. Over the past few days, I've been scoping things out and making a plan. Anybody who does this has to choose his own sign, and the one I've picked has a spray-painted X on the back. With a wrench from the toolbox on the back of my truck, I remove the sign from the metal post. After I have the sign taken down, I place it flat on the bottom of my truck bed. I drive out to the Williamson land and pull off the road, parking in a secluded, unused red dirt driveway located on the far side of the barn. Admittedly, the exterior of the barn is creepy as all get out, even at 17 years old. Briefly, I'm taken back to several years earlier, when I thought the stop sign man might be real. Just as quick as those stories begin to resurface in the back of my mind, I push all the nonsense away and focus on the present. Here's the kicker about all of this. Tonight, I'm going to one-up Mark Taylor. My visit to the stop sign man is going to be recorded. If the girls got a kick out of Mark's penny trick, Allison is going to flip the F out when she sees this. With the stop sign held under one arm and my phone in the other hand, I walk toward my destination. For dramatic effect, I hold the phone at a low angle, recording the tall weeds that slap and brush against my jeans. Once there, I lift the wooden latch and push the door open with the toe of my boot. The rusty hinges creak in the still, dark night. The door makes a soft slap against the interior wall. Finally, I step inside. Narrow slants of moonlight come through the gaps between the boards of the wall. The smell of old straw hangs heavy in the air. Not knowing what else to do, what step I'm supposed to take next, I toss the sign onto a loose scattering of hay, and nothing happens. I'm about to leave when the wall on the far side of the barn begins to shake like a set of shutters in a thunderstorm. As the boards clatter, A shower of thick dust falls from the rafters, making me cough and sneeze. Finally, the wall literally folds in on itself, and I'm able to see what is on the other side. A wet, boggy swamp. This can't be real, I think. This has to be a prank. "Greg!" I call out. "I don't know how you're doing this, but you need to cut it out." I imagine him around the corner or high above in the hayloft, looking down on me, watching and laughing. Movement within the wetland catches my attention, and I look. A girl is standing on the end of a moss-covered wooden dock. She's wearing a white tank top that's way too small and a pair of jean shorts that fit tight over her thighs. Roxy. A moment later, I'm standing on the dock in front of her. I have no idea how I got here. I look down and see the bottom half of my jeans are covered in thick, dark-colored muck. Obviously, I walked through the water, but I don't remember any of it. I wonder if I'm hallucinating. "Greg!" I call out again. "Enough is enough! Joke's over!" Roxy speaks. There's nobody here but us. Her voice is soft and strangely seductive. At first, I think she's talking about me and her, but then I notice her eyes look over my shoulder. I turn to look. A shadowy figure is standing in the barn. I can't make out any particular features, but I can tell it's a guy with a body built like an athlete. The tips of Roxy's fingers brush against my neck. The length of her nails causes my skin to crawl. For some reason, when I turn back around, I'm looking at her exposed midriff. A cubic zirconia belly button piercing catches a sparkle of light. Logically, I know I should run far, far away. But there's something else deep inside of myself. A pull that makes me stay. It draws my body closer to hers. She slides her fingertips against my lips. "It is done," she says. "You are a man." 5. I wake up the next morning still wearing the clothes I had on the night before. The inside of my mouth feels like I've been chewing on a sheet of coarse sandpaper. My head pounds, and when I sit up, I feel dizzy. Sitting on the edge of the bed, it takes me a moment to gain my composure. I stumble into the bathroom to take a leak and brush my nasty-ass teeth. That's when I notice the crumbly, crusty mud smeared across my shirt and jeans. Dry leaves are stuck in my messy hair. I look like crap. My eyes are bloodshot. Below them, dark bags. My skin has a washed-out, sallow look. To someone else, I might look like I've been on an all-night bender. After looking for my phone, which is nowhere to be found, I change clothes and then go into the kitchen for a glass of water. Dad's sister, Rita, is here. Aunt Rita lives next door and comes and goes as she pleases. Currently, she's sitting at the kitchen table, talking on her phone. She acknowledges me with a brief smile. I pull a glass from the cabinet and fill it with tap water. This is just like 1996 all over again, Aunt Rita says to whomever it is she's talking to. I'm clueless to the reference, but I can tell by the sound of her voice that she's upset. "Did you hear about that girl?" Aunt Rita asks. Now her voice has a different tone. "The one in your class." It takes me a second to realize she's talking to me. I pinch my eyes in confusion and shake my head. "Allison Weaving," she explains. "She had a crash last night. She died." My heart slams against my ribcage. The glass of water nearly slips from my grip, but instead I slam it onto the countertop. "What do you mean?" "Another car T-boned hers. They say she died on impact." I feel so terrible for that girl's parents. The loss they must be going through is impossible to fathom. This can't be happening, I think. The room is twirling around me. I need to sit down. Aunt Rita continues. They say the stop sign was gone. The driver of the other car didn't even know they should stop. What I'm hearing can't be true. It all makes me feel like I could puke. Finally, I fall into the seat of the chair opposite Aunt Rita. Where did it happen? What road was it on? Her answer solidifies the thoughts churning through my head. Way out on Lehman. Later that day, English class is interrupted by the secretary from the principal's office. After tapping on the door, Mrs. Brown leans her head in and calls my name. I stand from my desk and feel the entire room watching me. Mrs. Brown escorts me down the hall. It's the middle of fourth period. All the other students are in class. It's just me and her. The heels of her shoes clomp on the tiles. The sound is loud and echoes in the long, narrow space. Mrs. Brown opens the door to the office, and I notice right away that 2 uniformed police officers are standing next to the principal's desk, and Dad is here too. I can tell he's pissed. Stratton Duke, one of the officers steps forward. There's something we'd like to talk to you about. You turned 17 last night, right? More scares to come after these quick messages. Six. I'm sitting in the back seat of the officer's car. The old Williamson barn looks even creepier than it did the night before. Now, the mystical ambience of the setting is long gone. It seems real. It is real, I remind myself. And the reality of all this terrifies me. The repercussions of my actions are gut-wrenching. It wasn't supposed to be like this, I say. It's just a silly urban legend. We get out of the car and I lead the officers inside. Dad follows us, but he remains quiet the whole time. He stands with his arms crossed, watching. And you say you dropped the sign, and that wall there, the officer nods across the space. You say it opened up? I can tell by the look on his face that he doesn't believe a word I've said. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, that's exactly what happened. And this girl, Roxy, you call her, she took your innocence? I notice a smirk on the second officer's face. Yes, I say. It's not anything raunchy. Well, not like sex, or I don't think so anyway. Look, I'm not sure what happened, but I'm telling the truth. The second officer walks across and pulls open a wide door, revealing a second room. This one is full of stop signs. From floor to ceiling is a menagerie of red octagons. Some of them are lying on the floor while others are nailed to the walls and the support beams. With both doors open, wind barrels through the space. The hanging signs swing and clatter against each other. Look, kid, what you're telling us, all that mess about the stop sign man, is nothing new. I've heard it all before. Don't forget I grew up in these parts. I've heard the stories. Hell, when I was your age, I was tempted to do it myself. But the thing is, I didn't. What we're dealing with now is something else altogether, the other man speaks up. A girl is dead because of what you did. I ride home in the back of the cop car. After being issued a citation for theft, I stand on the porch and watch the cruiser pull out of the driveway. The horrifying truth of the matter hangs over my head. I could be charged with involuntary manslaughter. After telling me I'm grounded for the rest of my life, Dad heads back to his job. He's working a double and can't get out of it. While he's gone, I decide to sneak out and make a quick visit to Greg's house. I pull into Greg's yard and spot him sitting on the porch swing, drinking one of his dad's cheap beers. "I've been worried sick about you," he says. "What's going on?" I'm sure the gossip of me leaving with the police spread like wildfire through the school, and I can only imagine the assumptions people have already made. Greg offers me a beer, but I decline. I take a seat on the steps and tell him everything. 7.
They say if you get caught, the stop sign man will come after you. You can't sleep because he invades your dreams, and staying awake doesn't help either. He constantly stalks every corner of your mind, turning every peaceful thought into a nightmare. Even when I was talking to Greg, my attention was broken by the shape of the porch tiles. Octagons. Greg didn't believe my story. In fact, he suggested I seek mental help. The knowledge that my best friend no longer has my back hurts me, deep inside. After leaving Greg's house, I have an idea. My phone. I recorded everything the night before. I wasn't able to find the phone in my room this morning, and I hadn't seen it in the barn this afternoon. There's one person I can think of who might have an answer. Finding the phone won't change what I did, but it will give proof that I'm not crazy. Instead of going home, I make a stop at the filling station where I spot Roxy. Today, she's leaning against the wall by the bathrooms. I get out of my truck and charge across the parking lot, not stopping until I'm standing directly in front of her. Her hair is damp from a recent shower. I can smell the flowery scent of shampoo. Other than the wet hair, she looks exactly like she did last night. "Where's my phone?" I cut right to the chase. Roxy laughs and stands up straight. "I don't have your phone, Stratton." My name on her voice is like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh yeah? Well, where is it then? I just happened to lose it, huh?" I throw up my hands. "That would be really convenient, wouldn't it?" Roxy reaches out and grabs my forearm. The sleeve of her shirt rides up, and I notice a sketchy red tattoo spread across the underside of her wrist. The artwork is badly done. It's like something someone would get in prison, but the symbol is clear enough. A stop sign. "Let go of me!" I jerk my arm away. "What you did takes someone of a certain character," she says. "Why did you do it anyway? Was it to prove a point? Or to show that it was because of a girl?" My voice cracks. Roxy laughs again. This time it sounds like a cackle coming from an old witch. "You came to the barn with one goal in mind, and you got it. That girl was standing in your way. She would have held you back." I realize now that Allison's death wasn't just an accident caused by what I'd done. She was payment. I'm not sure what for, but I know it's something I don't want. "That's messed up," I say. "If I would have known there was a price, I would have never—" "You're part of it now, honey. From here on, it's between you and him. You have to finish what you started." By him, I know she means the stop sign man. If facing him is what I have to do, so be it. Fine. My breath is coming and going out of my lungs in deep, rhythmic puffs. I'll do it. 8. The first rule in the legend of the stop sign man is that you have to go alone. I look at it like this. If I got myself into this mess, I'm the only one who can get myself out. I'm still not sure how or why, but the octagon shape is significant. I think I can use that bit of folklore against him. When I get home, I go into my closet and find an old workbook from when I was a kid. One of the multiple choice questions was to select an octagon from a group of shapes. I'd picked one, but it was wrong. Next to a red X, the teacher wrote, "An octagon must have 8 equal sides." Then I go into the garage where I find the hatchet Dad uses to chop firewood. Later, I park in front of the Williamson barn. I go inside. Not long after entering, I hear movement in the hayloft above me. I turn to face the wooden steps that lead upward, and I wait for the stop sign man to appear. Finally, he does. The steps creak under his weight. His thin legs are bare. The skin on his feet is thick, calloused, and cracked. The toes are gnarled and bent like the knots on an ancient tree stump. He's wearing a pair of white boxers. It's obvious he's built from pieces of different men. His torso is defined with muscle, despite the 50s-era greaser haircut. His face is wrinkled and spotted with age. The story Mr. Perry told me 10 years ago is true. His eyes are spinning red octagons. What are you? I ask. When he speaks, his voice has an eerie timbre of a teenager and a 90-year-old speaking at the same time.
We're an organization that stretches all across the Southeast, from Virginia to Texas and everywhere in between. Right here in South Carolina just happens to be the epicenter. A secret society, some might call it, or a cult, or...
In a flash, he's standing in front of me. I can feel his breath against my face. So, are you the president of the whole thing? I ask. He scoffs at my question.
Of this particular chapter, yes.
The idea that there are others like him makes my head spin.
Everywhere, all over, there are boys, young men, looking for ways to achieve their wildest dreams. But this is not about them. This is about us. Let me show you.
He grabs hold of my arm. His grip is strong. The palm of his hand feels like hot asphalt against my flesh.
Look deep into my eyes. Really, really deep.
I don't want to, but I'm transfixed. I stare into his face, and our eyes lock. His octagon-shaped eyes light up in a traffic light glow of green, and I fall into them.
Go,
he says.
Go, go, go.
And I do. I let myself go. It's as if the interior of the barn melts away from us. In my mind, I'm speeding through space and time, through the years of my life that haven't happened yet. I see myself with what seems like everything a man could want.
It's different for everybody,
he says.
What you imagine won't be the same for the next.
In the vision, it all goes on and on.
There's no stopping us,
he says.
You see the potential. You see what you can be, the things you can do. An octagon symbolizes a rite of passage. 8 is a number of transcendence.
I recognize the truth. All of what he's showing me only looks good on the surface. None of it is worth the price he tricked me into paying. Somehow my thoughts break the spell.
You weren't tricked,
he snaps.
You wanted to steal that sign. It was your idea. You wanted to prove you were a man.
I shake my head. No, not like this, I didn't. I think about the page from my grade school workbook and all the various shapes that were drawn on it. Do you know what the opposite of an octagon is? A surprised look spreads across his face. His eyes fade to yellow, and then the red they were before.
Stop,
he demands. I answer my own question. It's a concave polygon. I pull the hatchet from the waistband at the back of my jeans. It means one of the sides is angled inward. At the sight of the weapon, the man's mouth drops open impossibly wide. I notice his teeth for the first time. They're the yellow of corn. I swing the axe against the wall. The first blow only cracks the wood, but it's enough to cause the stop sign man to pause. He cries out in pain, clutching his side with both hands. His body bends. I swing the axe again, harder this time. The wood splinters. The stop sign man hollers. This time his voice is so loud it cuts deep into my essence. Dark blood gushes through the gaps between his fingers.
Stop!
He yells, jerking his disproportioned body back and forth, moving toward me. With the hand not holding his side, he reaches toward me.
Put the axe down, you little shit!
I don't. I swing a third time, Harder now. The sharp end of the blade crashes through, and I jerk it free. The broken slats are jagged and sharp. My nemesis's body folds over on itself like the snap of a mousetrap, and as his bones crack, it sounds like that too. The vocals of his agony pour from his throat in a torrent of pain. Still, he reaches for me. He's not giving up. I'm on the other side of the space, and just as he returns to his unsteady feet, I swing the axe through this section of lumber. His body slams over. This time, a deep fissure cuts into his abdomen, pulling his upper half horizontal to the floor. Now I'm sure what I have to do to finish this once and for all. Each of the next 5 walls are met with the blade, and each time my ears are assaulted with the agony of the stop sign man being reduced to a broken and splintered pile of nothing. On the 8th wall, I chop the blade through the boards and then twist the handle so the axe head catches on the other side. Then I pull with all my might. The wall splinters inward, and the screams are finally silenced as the stop sign man's head splits in two. I stand for a moment, catching my breath, when the entirety of the barn begins to rattle around me. 9. On my 18th birthday, I go out to the intersection on Lehman Road. Now a wooden cross stands by the road, marking the spot where Allison died. On that night the year before, after I brought down the barn and destroyed the stop sign man, I drove out here and reattached the sign to the post. I was taken into custody for destruction of property. Thankfully, Dad bailed me out. He told me it was the one and only time he'd ever do it. My actions didn't bring Allison back, and my phone was never found. But the evidence from a nearby game camera and the analysis of the skid marks at the intersection revealed the truth. The fatal wreck wasn't because of the missing sign. The car that hit Allison was coming from the opposite direction. It's been 1 year since all of that happened. 1 + 8 is 9. Recently, I learned that one of the meanings behind the number is wisdom. After dropping a single flower next to the wooden cross, I drive away. The end.
The Devil Reaps the Harvest by John Oak Dalton. The laboratory at the end of the dead-end road had been closed for so long now that people had forgotten all about it, or tried to forget about it, and now everybody said it was an abandoned factory. It was there that Peter O'Day was supposed to meet a guy who had a couple of kidneys and a beer cooler. So Peter parked in a weed-choked employee lot and walked about a quarter of a mile into the woods, where the old laboratory sat. There, he was meeting Octavius. Octavius sounded like a mad scientist's name, and as it happened, Octavius kind of was a mad scientist. He had worked at the lab long ago, doing things that are frowned upon in the mainstream medical world, but that gig dried up. He ended up harvesting organs, which wasn't much of a step down. He still liked meeting people there for the handoff, because his greatest triumphs had been at that lab. Also his greatest failures. But those were buried here, and there, around the property. Peter had a bag of money, and Octavius had a cooler with organs in it and a New England Patriots sticker on it, so that went down about like you'd expect. Peter was a .com guy the bubble never burst on, so he had plenty of money and could jump the transplant list and buy a new kidney for their little girl, Alondra. People with money can pretty much do what they want. Just look at celebrities. They do drugs and get married 8 or 10 times, but can adopt all the kids they want and go on TV talking about various causes. If they did all the same things but lived in that trailer park on the other edge of town, the one called Morningside, but everybody actually called it Homicide, nobody would give them kids or want them on TV talking about their causes. When Peter took the Patriots cooler from Octavius that had a kidney and a spare for Alondra, His hands were shaking pretty badly, and some of the blood sloshed out from under the lid and onto his shoes and into the dirt. And it wasn't until that very moment that Peter sort of realized what the hell he was doing. Octavius stepped back easily and missed the sloshing, but he was used to blood spraying out all over the place. Peter nodded and walked away, but Octavius stayed where he was, to his misfortune. He had parked behind the old lab on an access road everybody had forgotten about, too, because he did not want Peter or anybody else to see the car he drove. Peter was hardly out of sight when something just under Octavius's feet, where the blood was soaking in, sniffed and swallowed and opened its eyes. If this lab had been that good at black science, they'd still be in business, but they weren't, so they made the mistake of burying their problems instead of burning them in a big bonfire so that there would be no trace. Or, in this case, so something could not bite and claw its way with long fingernails and sharp teeth out of the dirt and grab Octavius by the ankles, then pull him to the ground and bite him right on his face. But his face was kind of bony, so it started working on some of the soft parts. Peter had stopped not far away to call his wife, but never heard a damn thing. It was ironic because as soon as that creature's hand popped out of the dirt, Octavius's heart popped like a balloon. All those times Octavius had arranged for guys to meet Russian women off the internet for a night of passion, only for those guys to wake up in the hotel tub packed in ice, or dumped in a landfill and never waking up at all. All those times Octavius never knew he needed an organ himself. He ignored the shortness of breath and the tingling in his fingers and all the rest. Like I said, if they were better at science, they would still have been in business. And if they weren't also lazy, they would have buried these things deeper. Peter's wife was named Stacy and was waiting in a big McMansion out in the suburbs for news of Alondra's kidney. Do I even need to say that this was his second wife? And very young? We're halfway there, Peter told her. It's not like a pig kidney or anything, she asked. How would I know? I don't know, she fretted. Look, this guy came highly recommended, and when it comes to Alondra, we don't have another choice. I know, said Stacy, and there was a lot in those words. And those two words were all the feelings Stacy had growing for little Alondra, and all the feelings Peter lacked. But Peter did what he had to do. What Peter had to do next was walk out of the edge of the overgrown parking lot and wait for a guy from the transplant organization he'd paid off. Actually, this guy, whose name was Rollo, knew Octavius quite well, but neither man wanted anyone to know they were connected. Rollo had worked in that lab too, back in the day. Not so much in the sciences as in the more nebulous parts of the organization. Octavius could have just given the organ to Rollo, but Octavius and Rollo always wanted a middleman. It wasn't foolproof, but it was better than nothing. Look, just go to the hospital and wait, Peter said. The guy is on his way here, and then he's going to be bringing the kidneys within the hour. Okay, said Stacy, but there was so much she could not face. She knew she was staying right where she was. Okay, and Peter hung up. Peter had only taken a few steps before he saw something moving in the trees, just out of the corner of his eye. Of course, Peter was thinking it was a cop, or the FBI, or maybe an investigative reporter trying to entrap him and put him on TV with all the pedophiles. So Peter stepped off the road and hid behind a tree, which was stupid because, unlike cops and FBI agents and reporters, what was shambling towards him could smell the blood on his shoes. Peter peeked around the tree and realized he was wrong about the cops and the reporters because how this person was dressed, how this shape was dressed, was in things Goodwill would not take. They looked like clothes somebody took out of a compost pile. Peter started moving quickly through the trees, trying not to slosh the beer cooler too much, and cut cross-country towards the parking lot. All the bones and muscles and ligaments in the things sniffing along behind Peter, which seemed barely connected to each other, still let the thing move faster than you would think. But
it would not have mattered if Peter had watched where he was going, which he did not, so he overshot the parking lot and thrashed deeper into the woods. And the thing that could smell his bloody footprints, who saw the shoe prints glowing like fire, kept on coming. Peter saw the bland gray concrete block of the lab building looming in front of him, and he realized he'd been a dumbass and circled back on himself. He was ultimately a tech guy. He'd never been much out in nature and did not really know how to navigate even a small forest of trees, much less tell one from another. And he'd never seen a dead body. But he recognized that Octavius was dead when he saw what was left of him in the small clearing where they had met up minutes ago. The chewed parts and the parts that should have been tucked inside but were glistening in the sun. The thing behind Peter was getting closer. So close now Peter could hear a slurping noise. And Peter turned and looked, and what he saw sent his heart plummeting and his balls scurrying up inside himself to meet it, and his butthole slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Peter dropped the beer cooler, and this time a lot more blood sloshed out than was good, and the thing moved faster somehow. Peter grabbed the cooler back up and started running. Peter was running, and the only place he knew he was running was away, wherever that was. And he was bouncing off of trunks and getting whipped in the face by branches and all that because instead of joining Boy Scouts, he had taught himself computer programming. He was richer, but very close to being dead, so some of his life choices seemed poorer today. He kept splashing blood out of that cooler, and that wasn't great for Alondra, but more importantly for Peter, it wasn't great for him at all. So Peter stopped and opened the cooler. He plunged his hand in and grabbed out a kidney that was in a leaky sandwich bag, and he flung that kidney in a long red arc that hit the thing's chest with a wet sound and plopped into the grass. And the creature looked down at it with yellow eyes, and it gave Peter a chance to catch his breath. Then the creature showed broken teeth and reached down with those long nails and grabbed the kidney up. And it went down in one gulp, and Peter threw up in his mouth a little. When Peter ran this time, he didn't even pick up the cooler. The thing tipped the cooler back and gulped the other kidney down, and that bought Peter a little more time. Peter ran and looked back, and sure enough, in a minute or two he saw that raggedy shape moving between the trees again. Peter was looking back when his foot touched asphalt, and he was out on a country road. The woman driving the minivan was leaning over, pushing the Hocus Pocus DVD into the dashboard for her kids in the back seat to watch for the millionth time, so she didn't even tap the brake before she hit Peter head on. Rather than explain what that looked like, it's simpler to say the kids never asked to watch Hocus Pocus ever again. As it happens, Rollo was not too far behind the woman in a truck that looked like a medical vehicle, but really wasn't. Rollo was very quick on his feet and looked like he had a lot of authority. He bet on ponies with the same authority, but no common sense, which is what got him into this bad situation to begin with. It didn't take much for Rollo to convince the stunned woman that he was going to take care of everything, and she was free to go. He would even contact her insurance company for her. She wrote everything down on a piece of paper with tears in her eyes. Of course, as soon as she drove away, he chucked that paper in a cup of cold coffee he'd left on the dash. Rollo set to looking around for that cooler and started back into the tree line. He didn't find it, but he found a shambling, shuffling creature with blood dripping off of a lipless, leering mouth and grasping, clawed hands stained with blood. Rollo was a bad gambler, but he'd been a good crooked cop and a decent EMT who stole drugs, so he took a snub-nosed .32 he kept under his shirt tail in the back and shot that thing in both its yellow eyes. It fell down, as you might suspect, and did not get back up. Then Rollo found the empty, bloody cooler with the Patriot sticker on it. His mind remained remarkably clear, and he knew what he had to do. Rollo did a very good job at the transplant center, which was his real job now, but he paid special attention when he was getting a fat envelope on the side. Rollo pulled Peter's body up into the back of the white truck, that if you squinted your eyes at it, might be a medical vehicle. He had some tools back there that
could have medical uses. The back of his truck was not as clean as some places, but it was not as dirty as the back room of that massage parlor where Rollo knew Octavius had done a little surgery. If he hadn't already been a decent EMT, he could have used YouTube. Stacy had been sitting very still in her spacious living room when the doorbell rang. She answered it, her hands trembling. 2 stone-faced men in dark suits stared at her. "Stacy O'Day?" one asked. It was more of a statement than a question. "Yes, is this about Alondra?" she asked. "In a manner of speaking," the man showed her a piece of official-looking paper. "This is a warrant to search your house." Stacy took a step back. "But Alondra's in the hospital. She needs a transplant. It's on its way. Why is this happening right now?" The man looked at her. "That's just it. The hospital checked. There's no record that Alondra was officially adopted from anywhere." Stacy swallowed hard. "There's no record she was ever enrolled in school." Stacy got her feet under her. She's homeschooled. Your neighbors have a lot to say. One of them says they saw a mattress on the floor in the basement, next to an ironing board and a stack of laundry." Stacy shook her head. "We're painting her room." "So, can you show me that room?" he asked. "Like I said, it's being painted." The cop gave her a 1,000-yard stare. "You're not the first housewife that needed a little help around the place." Tears showed in Stacy's eyes. "She's living better than she was in that hellhole orphanage." "She will be. She's in surgery, and the kidney looks like it's going to take." Stacy leaned against the wall with relief, which surprised the 2 cops. "But she's not coming back here," the cop added. Stacy stood up straight. "If I didn't care, I wouldn't have pushed to get her that kidney when she got sick." The cop had cold eyes. "What else could you do? I reckon you didn't keep the receipt." Stacy processed this. She looked the cop full in the face. "This whole thing, it started out differently than it ended, with Alondra. At least for me." Stacy making that statement was the only thing that kept the cops from cuffing her and banging her head on the door when they lowered her into the back seat. They let her walk out on her own free will, but she did not see that McMansion again for a long time. The cops assumed Peter had run out on Stacy and all of their problems. Nobody ever found a trace of him. They were soon distracted by a very large fire at an old factory in the woods outside of town, which burned a big tract of land. Rollo had a steady hand and a clear head, and got a bonus for all his quick thinking. Didn't change his luck at the track, but you can't have it all. Grave Consequences by Killian Crane. Dennis's shovel bit into packed dirt. Years of practice told him he'd passed the 5-foot marker. Only a few more inches and his blade would strike the coffin lid. This was one of the good cemeteries. It was off of a main road, but the town was sleepy, and there were no lights. No lights meant he could park damn near on top of the grave. He wouldn't have to lug everything from a block or 2 away. As an added bonus, the night dripped with a heavy fog. It would be impossible to see his electric lantern from a distance. Mr. Piles told him to look for an old money tombstone, and he wasn't kidding. The once lavish tombstone had a statue of a weeping angel wielding a sword, staring down at Dennis as he worked. At the angel's feet read, "Here lies Vanya Mills." Her birth year was worn away, but she died in 62. Chances were, anyone coming to check on dear old Vanya was either an old fart or buried close by. He dug faster, feeling sweat drip down his chin. He learned long ago to keep plenty of sweat rags handy for long nights, and there was a fresh beach towel already waiting for him in the driver's seat of his truck. He had a change of shoes in his covered bed, where he'd place his muddy boots and tools of the trade in one large trash bag, and his haul in another. If it was too big, he'd just wrap it in painter's plastic and tape it up. Once upon a time, Dennis was something of a jack of all trades. A pipe fitter when he could pass a drug test, a construction hand when he couldn't, and a thief in between. It was a stroke of genius that he found his favorite form of larceny: grave robbing. Many homeowners were getting home security systems, the ones with anything worth stealing anyway. The same was basically true of people. You'd never guess who all was packing across the country. Sure, some places had hinky gun laws, but that didn't stop Granny from carrying a .45. Dennis knew that from experience. Several years ago, he'd held up an old woman, and she pulled heat on him. Luckily, her hands shook something fierce. The .45 rang his ears, but didn't ventilate him. Dennis had enough gumption to snatch the revolver from her hands. He retaliated, stomping Granny's ass into the ground. She had just been protecting herself, but she damn near killed him. To teach her a lesson, Dennis made sure that she had the ass-whooping of her long life. When he found the only thing of value she had was the revolver and a coin purse with a whopping $5 in change, he decided that robbing people was just too much drama. That night, he used the $5 to get a coffee at a local diner. The night had been rough, so Sweet Thang at the counter wasn't getting a tip. The local paper was on the counter, opened to the obits. One in particular caught his eye. A local heiress, pretty little thing, probably in her 40s, had kicked the bucket. She wore something intricate around her neck. The black and white photo didn't do the thing justice, but he could tell it was gold and diamonds. It was then he had an idea. While he waited for her to be buried, Dennis pawned the .45 for $300, then went to the hardware store for things he thought he'd need: a shovel, crowbar, mallet, good rope, bolt cutters, flashlights and a lamp, towels, and large trash bags. It all came out to just under $200. Another $85 went to a shithole motel nearby, and the last $15 to his name went to a good hot meal. He had a full night's work ahead of him, and he needed to have his strength up. Once he was at the cemetery, he realized just how brilliant his plan was. Graveyards were empty at night. The dead made people uneasy, except goth kids, but they were easy to scare off. Another plus, there were no pigs on patrol. Small-town pigs couldn't be bothered that late when there was a car to sleep in or donuts to suck on. Best of all, graves didn't call the police or shoot back. They were buried treasure, waiting to be plundered. As he dug up the heiress's grave, he had this feeling of destiny. As macabre as it was, this was what he was truly put on earth for. His shovel bit greedily into the dirt. Like a first date, he was both nervous and excited to meet Little Miss Money. When he finally felt the thunk of his shovel on her coffin lid, he scraped away enough of the dirt to put his hand on bare wood. He gave the coffin a little knock. "You in there, Sweet Thang?" No answer. "Don't you worry, I'm on my way." He cleared the dirt away from the top and the sides and slid his crowbar under the lip of the lid. It was like he was at a casino pulling the handle of a slot machine. Would he hit? Would he bust? He pulled the crank. The lid popped with a hiss. She still smelled sweet, like flowers. He turned away, caught in a sneezing fit. Anything scented always did this to him. Well, damn near anything, really. He had a sensitive nose. He sniffled, embarrassed that she saw him like this on their first meeting, but that embarrassment evaporated when he saw the gold chain encrusted with diamonds around her pretty little neck. Jackpot. He took the necklace off her. She didn't seem to mind. As he stared at her, he had another bright idea. She wasn't doing anyone any good laying in that coffin, but maybe she could still be good to someone out there. He threw the heiress over his shoulders and loaded her into the back seat of his sedan. It took a little doing to get her seated on account of her being so stiff, but he got it done. Dennis buckled her in and covered his work. In the driver's seat, he wiped his forehead with an old bandana. He saw her through the rearview mirror, staring at him. The glue holding her eyes closed had come undone. It freaked Dennis out a little, but she was just a stiff. Nothing she could do to anyone. "I know this car ain't what you're probably used to," he said, giving her a bashful smile, "but I hope you enjoy the ride." He threw the sedan in drive and crept out of the cemetery. To Dennis's surprise, it didn't take much searching to find a buyer for the heiress. Down a dirt road that the sedan didn't like, he found the old ranch house of Mr. Piles. He was an old man with a look in his eye of terrible intelligence. He and Dennis shook, and he explained that he was a sort of artist. After viewing the heiress and seeing what he liked, he paid Dennis $2,000 for her, in cold, hard cash. He was floored, like a kid looking at the ocean for the first time. Before Dennis could leave, Mr. Piles fetched 2 glasses and a batch of moonshine from the cabinet. "You got time for a drink?" the old man asked. "I got an offer for you might like to hear." Dennis never was one to say no to good money, so he stayed for the drink. "I've been looking for someone like you," Mr. Piles said. "Been looking a long while. You know, in the right hands, a dead body can be spun into gold." He poured 2 shots of moonshine and slid one to Dennis. "How would you like to make this a regular thing?" Dennis stared at the shot of moonshine, reminiscing about the thrill of the dig. He flexed his fingers, remembering the tension of his crowbar under the lid of the coffin. For the sake of formality, he had to ask, "What's the pay?" Mr. Piles smiled. "Same for her. $2,000 a stiff. Anything on their person is a bonus for you, unless specifically instructed otherwise." For Dennis, it was a no-brainer. They toasted, the moonshine burned on the way down, and their pact was forged. Mr. Piles gave him a burner phone, a name, a photo of a gravestone, and an address. Dennis set out immediately. Things went that way for 3 good years. Since then, Dennis sold the sedan in favor of a 4-wheel drive truck with a long bed and a hard cover. An 8-foot bed meant he could put a basketball player in the back, if need be. His new profession took him all across the country. He found that northern dirt didn't like to give like the ground in the south, and the more rain a place got, the better for the older graves. Wet ground meant the coffins weren't busted when he got to them. He wasn't sure why that was. He just knew it meant he had a lot less work to do. A busted coffin meant playing archaeologist, and on more than one occasion it resulted in a bust. Despite his love of southern coffins, southern air played hell with his allergies. They were bad enough as it was, but the South really let him have it. He caught a sneeze in the crook of his arm for probably the 10th time that night. The angel looked down at him scornfully. "Bless me," he said, blowing a snot rocket at her feet before he kept digging. Most of the houses near the cemetery looked like old money. Chances were Vanya was probably a trophy wife for some local millionaire when she was alive, meaning she carried some trophies into the afterlife. Dennis hoped, anyway. He wondered if Vanya was feeling lonely down there. Maybe she was looking forward to finding a new friend in Mr. Piles. He wasn't sure what the old man did with any of the bodies. Dennis brought him all kinds of people at various stages of decay. He learned that graves over 50 years old were usually just the frame. He enjoyed those graves the best. Bones were easy to pick and clean and load into the truck. As he bit into the dirt, the shovel jolted with a thunk. "Thar she be," he whispered, with a smile. He cleared away enough dirt to touch the coffin lid. If that little bit was any indication, Vanya's coffin was a good-looking one in its heyday. Fingers crossed for a bonus, he gave the lid a little knock. I'm coming for you, old biddy. You better be decent. He cleared away the dirt as he had so many times before, and grabbed his crowbar. If the lid wouldn't act right, he'd have to grab the mallet and force it open. But he wasn't worried about that. Vanya was going to be a good girl. She wanted to feel the air on her old cheeks again, and if she played her cards right, she could leave with Dennis. Like a good southern coffin, the crowbar slid under the lip, with no resistance. Gripping in his hands, feeling how ready the lid was to pop, Dennis wiped excited sweat from his brow. Would he hit? Would he bust? All he had to do was pull and find out. The lid popped with a hiss. Dead air swelled into the night sky, and Dennis found himself in another sneezing fit. Allergies and the dead didn't mix well. "It's okay, old gal," he said once he could breathe again. "We'll get you out of that stinking box." Lit up, Dennis leveled his lantern, not understanding what he saw. Where Vanya should have been, there was a ragged hole leading somewhere below the ground. Dennis lowered his lamp, trying to see past the dark. Uneasily, he realized that wherever the hole went, it went deep. From the depths below, a screech shattered the silence of the night. Dennis tripped face forward. Before he could grab for anything, he was falling through the coffin, into nothing. As he slid, the dirt scraped painfully into his stomach. Then he stopped sliding and started falling, spinning in the air. Something not dirt broke his fall. A jolt of pain shot from his ankle as he landed wrong, and his lantern went out. Above, he heard the coffin lid slam shut. He was left in total darkness. Instinctively, he reached for his leg, but he was waist deep in something slimy and dense. His heart pounded in his throat as pitch black pressed in on him. The smell was unbearable, making him vomit on himself. He tried to be quiet about it because somewhere, someone was crying. He fumbled for his lantern, fingers trembling as they dug into slime and something else. "Please," he whispered, the sound of his echoing voice terrifying him. After what felt like an eternity, he found the lantern. He pressed the button, but it wouldn't come on. "No," he hissed. "No, no, no." He jammed the button madly, but still, the light wouldn't activate. He felt himself sinking deeper. Liquid drenched his clothes and wet his skin. Whatever it was, it felt disgusting. "Please," he cried, terror almost drowning him. After an eternity, the lantern blessedly came on, and the echoes of someone crying stopped immediately. Despite its blinding effect, Dennis held the light close to himself, thanking the powers that be that it wasn't dark anymore. But as his eyes adjusted, and he saw what it was he'd fallen into, realized what it was that he smelled, he wished otherwise. He was in a large cavern. As he squirmed, he sank deeper into a pile of bodies, each of them at wildly different stages of decomposition. Through the muck, he could see that they were missing parts. Faces ripped off, hands missing, bodies torn in two. He tried to wriggle free, only succeeding in falling further into the pile. The dead weight began to press on him, and with the little air he had left in his lungs, he screamed. From the single rough entrance to the cavern came a faint light, accompanied by wailing. Whatever the crying thing was, it knew he was near. He tried to turn off the lamp, but the button was jammed. The glow beyond the cavern grew brighter as the patter of bare feet and wild shrieking closed in on him. He was out of time, and only saw one option. He flung the lantern away and played dead. The crying thing stepped into the cavern, having to hunch over. She was tall, with long red hair and impossibly long arms and legs. She wore a ragged black dress that was much too short for her skeletal frame, exposing her bony legs to the tops of her thighs. One slender hand held an electric lantern, bathing the room with questing light. With her other hand, she held her face. Tears streamed between her fingers and down her forearm where they dripped from her elbow. Peeking between her fingers, Dennis caught a look at her eyes. They were puffy and impossibly red, and searching for him. It took everything he had to keep up the act. Her hand, which ended in jagged nails covered with black grime, dropped from her varicose face, revealing crude makeup that ran down her cheeks, and cracked lips dribbling the same black grime on her fingers. What that grime could possibly be, Dennis didn't know. Snot flowed from her nose and a fresh line of drool leaked from her mouth. She looked like she was always trying to say something, but the tears only allowed hitching sobs. Her cries reminded him of his mother's the day his baby brother was put in the ground. That memory in this strange place sent cold sweat trickling down his spine. He wanted to look away, but he didn't dare move. She put her lantern down and reached for the one Dennis had flung, picking it up with two spindly fingers. She sniffed at the handle, licking it with a long, dirty tongue. Tears streamed down the lantern, glistening in the light. She gently placed his lantern on the ground and sniffed at the air. Her nose danced in his direction. With a sad grunt, she worked both hands into the piles of bodies. She fished out the bottom half of a corpse, her hand still searching the pile. Her sobbing mouth worked around a bloated thigh, every bite a struggle as her teeth sank into decayed flesh. Black goo bubbled around her mouth as her slender neck flexed and pulled. The sound of old thigh meat tearing from the bone made Dennis sick again, but he kept his face stone dead. His eyes begged him to blink, but he didn't care. As she chewed and swallowed, he could feel her other hand questing the muck near him. The dark liquids oozed down the length of the half-corpse, mixing with her tears into the dirt. Even as she ate, she sobbed. Her fingers prodded his foot. His heart jumped in his chest as she grabbed him by the ankle, testing him. As she pulled his leg, he grimly thought of his crowbar against the lid of the coffin. Would she hit? Would she bust? She squeezed, shooting fresh pain up his leg. He knew beyond a shadow of a doubt his ankle was broken. Like her, he began to cry. The tears rolled down his cheeks, but somehow he kept himself from blinking. Back and forth, she worked his leg, forcing Dennis to use willpower he didn't know he had to stay absolutely still. There was a rumbling in the pile. Her questing had disturbed some precarious balance, and the meat shifted in response. Dennis became even more entangled, only his head above the pressing corpses. The mourner squealed, her hand darting from his ankle into the shifting. She thought she had him. This might be my chance, he thought. It was a slim one, so impossibly slim, but maybe if she didn't find anything, she'd move on. It would be terrible, but maybe he could wait her out. There had to be another way out of this cavern. She got down here somehow. He wasn't sure yet what he'd tell Mr. Piles, but he'd burn that bridge when he got to it. Right then, he just had to stay calm. As the pile shifted, the body of an ancient woman whipped around to face Dennis. Around her bony neck was a solid gold necklace sparkling with fine emeralds. He was face to face with Vanya Mills. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. His night had already been the craziest of his life. He was terrified, and he should have been screaming, but all he could do was look at that necklace. Jackpot. It was beautiful, easily the most valuable thing he'd ever seen on a dead person, easily worth more than the bones wearing it.
Dear old Vanya was just another skeleton, begging Dennis to pick her clean. Mad glee threatened to creep into his stone face. He flexed his fingers, fighting the urge to grab the precious jewelry. The mourner wailed in anger, grabbing a body and flinging it into the cavern ceiling. It exploded up there like a party favor, and parts rained. An arm struck Dennis in the head. He couldn't scream now. He had to have that necklace. This thing thought she had him licked. She didn't. She didn't have any idea who Dennis was, what he was capable of. He was in his element. He understood then the intoxicating thrill he felt the night he stole the heiress. His entire life had been building up to this very moment. He breathed carefully, shallow breaths, reveling in how the dead made him feel alive. Vanya must have been able to read his mind because, as he stared into her empty hollows, she gave him a light, knowing smile. He wanted to smile back. No, Vanya, he thought, unblinking as his vision began to blur. You won't get me that easy. I'll be getting out of this one, and that necklace around your scrawny neck will be mine. The mourner collapsed, pulling at her hair, ripping it out in clumps, and pounding her fists into the ground. The thuds made Vanya's head tilt to one side. Now, she was questioning Dennis. She thought she had him licked too. She and the mourner were in this together. He might take Vanya's head as a souvenir, just to spite her. Take her on a vacation paid for with her necklace. That would show her. That would put her in her place. Who did she think she was? She thought she was a match for Dennis? He'd robbed hundreds of graves, hundreds, all of them preparing him for this, his masterpiece. You can't stop me, Vanya, he thought. No one can. I'm getting out of here. I'm gonna win. Vanya laughed at him. Not out loud, but in his head. As she did, her head whipped back and her jaw fell open. Dust spewed from her skull into Dennis's face. The kiss of death hit him just right. He wanted to cover his face, but he was thoroughly trapped by the dead. His grand plan to steal the necklace and Vanya's head evaporated as he let out a loud sneeze. The mourning lady stopped pounding the ground, and their eyes met for the first and last time. Terrified, Dennis realized he knew that look in her eyes all too well. Jackpot.
Dead and Breakfast by Morgan Moore. The screams of a young woman pierced the night as the source of the din exploded from the back door of her home, letting loose another screech in her wake. Her screaming didn't last long, as the cold night air cut off her wind, forcing her to stop, to catch her breath. She was enjoying a night to herself, while her mother babysat for her. But the peace she was hoping to get was shattered when a stranger knocked on her door. When she opened it, the man rushed her and chased her into the living room. A bottle to the head led to her escape, and here she was, taking a break to regain her composure. She was freezing, but there was no way she was going back into her house. A neighbor, any neighbor, would have to do. The young woman started to walk towards a distant gate when the man shoved his foot into the small of her back. With no time to react, he flipped her over, sitting knees first on her stomach. Stunned by the blow, she looked up at him. As the ice pick, recently pilfered from her own home, entered and exited her heart, repeatedly. When he finished, the man stood up and slid the ice pick into the pocket of his jacket before walking off into the cold, bitter night. I think it's stuck, Matt. Really, I hadn't noticed, Rachel, Matt replied sarcastically. Rachel, Matt, and their friends Danny and Jack had been trying to get in one last camping trip before the weather turned bitter. But a blizzard appeared out of nowhere midweek, so the quartet had packed up and hit the highway. The blizzard in full swing, the group took the recommended detours and ended up in a town called Oldsville. Or, more accurately, on the front lawn of a house they almost hit as they skidded off the road thanks to the ice that surrounded Oldsville. "So, now what do we do?" Danny asked as she held her arms against her body for extra warmth. "There's no way we're going to get any help out here tonight," Jack remarked. "Well, we have to do something or else we'll freeze," Matt interjected. Rachel looked around the area. He was right, she thought. They'd freeze to death if they stayed out here. Rachel looked around the neighborhood and noticed that the lights were off in every house except for the one they were stuck in front of. "Hey guys, it looks like the people who live here might still be up. Why don't we try asking them for help?" she suggested to her friends. The other three looked at each other and shrugged. "I'm game, as long as they have heat," Danny said. "And a warm bed to go with it," Jack added, grabbing Danny by the waist and bringing her into a kiss. "Don't get too lovey-dovey, you might get stuck together and not in the fun way," Matt said as he hauled out everybody's bags from the car. The four trudged up to the house and banged on the door all at once. Almost immediately, the door swung open. A middle-aged woman stood between them and the interior. "Yes?" she asked, slightly annoyed. "Hi, we're sorry to bother you, but we slid off the road and, into your yard?" Matt started gesturing to the car. "And anyways, it's stuck now. Is there any way you could let us spend the night?" He finished before giving the woman a warm smile, the others following suit. The woman looked at the group and shrugged a bit. "Well, I guess we'd be a really terrible bed and breakfast if I didn't let you sleep here. Come on in." She ushered them inside. "A bed and breakfast? I guess we lucked out big time. I didn't see a sign out in the yard, though," Rachel remarked as she and her friends stripped off their winter gear. "It's more than likely covered by all the snow," the caretaker explained. She led the group to the kitchen and after a few minutes handed them each a hot cup of tea. The foursome downed their beverages eagerly, which elicited a chuckle from the caretaker. "Are there any other guests staying here?" Danny asked. "Nope. You kids are probably the only ones we'll have until the weather blows over." "Well, how much do we owe you?" Jack asked. "Don't worry about it tonight. We can hash that out in the morning. No point in handling the business side of this now when you may end up staying a lot longer." The group looked at each other sheepishly. "Sounds like a plan then," Matt said, breaking the awkward silence. "I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired. Would you excuse us, ma'am?" "Not at all. The rooms are upstairs for guests. Pick whichever ones you want. My room is down here if you kids need anything," she explained, giving them all a smile. The stranger trudged through the harsh winter conditions. He did not know where he was going. He was only moving because he felt the urge to do so. He would need shelter soon. As if reading his mind, the snow let up some, the lights of the nearby house beckoning him. Rachel walked into the room she and Matt had claimed, buttoning up a pajama shirt as she did so. Matt sat on the bed looking at his phone. "Anything interesting?" Rachel asked. "I was checking the weather. Looks like the snow is definitely not stopping until late tomorrow night." "I guess that means we will be staying here for a bit," Rachel said, blowing a strand of hair from her face. "Looks like it," Matt said sternly. The stranger pried open the back door of the dwelling and slipped inside. Finding himself in a kitchen, he sat down at a table and pulled off his coat. He removed an ice pick from his pocket, laid it upon the table, and sighed at the sight of the instrument before him. Danny collapsed onto Jack and smiled before rolling off of him. The two lovers lied next to each other, sweat covering them. "I'm gonna take a shower while there's still some hot water," Danny said, exiting the room. Jack dozed off seconds later, only to come to in pitch blackness. He stumbled to his feet in search of his phone and the light it would provide. The stranger rushed at Jack and pinned him against the wall. Jack's assailant slid a gloved hand over his victim's mouth, tightly. The blows came fast, tearing his flesh savagely, again and again. The stranger let Jack's body collapse to the floor before heading to the bathroom and the sound of running water. Matt and Rachel rushed into the bathroom as Danny's screams rang out repeatedly. Now here they were, face to face with a psychopath. "Run!" Matt screamed as the stranger bolted towards them. The duo rushed down the stairs, nearly falling over one another as the stranger pursued them. Their eyes went to the front door, widening in joy that they would be free of this nightmare. The stranger tackled Matt. Rachel screamed. Matt turned his head to look at her as the stranger slit his throat. The killer stood up and turned to face Rachel. She bolted and dove out the window on the far side of the room and ran pell-mell into the cold night. The frigid air assaulted her lungs and skin. Rachel pressed on, desperately searching for signs of life in any of the neighboring houses. Minutes passed and she was ready to give up when a light appeared from a distant home. She stumbled forth up the stairs and beat on the door until her knuckles bled. The door opened a crack, and a middle-aged woman peered forth from the slight opening. Please help me!" The woman looked at Rachel, stunned. She gathered her wits and spoke. "What's the matter?" "Somebody's chasing me! He killed my friends!" The woman ushered Rachel inside and bolted the door shut. "Honey, I'm home!" a voice called out. "That's my husband. Let me go tell him what happened to you," the woman said as she left the room, wringing her hands. Rachel listened to the sound of a clock ticking away in the kitchen. The gentle tick-tock droned on and on as Rachel's eyelids grew heavier and heavier. Rachel started awake as footsteps approached. In the doorway stood the stranger, ice pick in hand, his lips split into a gruesome smile. Rachel's blood-curdling scream rung through the neighborhood and across the cold winter's night. All right, my spookies, you managed to survive a compilation of the Ides of March. Well, at least until next year. So please, make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcasting app because there's always more where that came from right here at Weekly Spooky. And while you're at it, leave us a 5-star rating. It really does mean a whole lot to us. But now it's time for me to get back to my job of recording terror tales to keep you all in suspense. Until next time, make sure you truly do heed the warning and beware the Ides of March, for they are waiting for you. I'll see you all next time, with any luck at all.